Steve Harvey has been hosting Family Feud for over a decade, and in that time, he has developed an almost sixth sense for when something is not quite right. He can tell when a contestant is nervous, when someone is overthinking their answer, or when a family is struggling with tension behind the scenes. But what happened during the taping of an episode in November 2024 was something Steve had never encountered before. A contestant was cheating, not in an obvious way, not in a way that anyone else seemed to notice. But Steve Harvey noticed, and what he did about it would shock everyone in the studio. The Anderson family from Nashville was competing against the Roberts family from Atlanta. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Both families were energetic, the banter was good, and the game was moving along smoothly. But Steve kept noticing something odd about one particular contestant. Derek Anderson, the 47-year-old patriarch of his family, seemed to know the answers before Steve even finished asking the questions. At first, Steve thought it was just confidence or good instincts. But as the game progressed, Steve's suspicion grew stronger. Something was not right. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. What you are about to witness is a masterclass in integrity, accountability, and why Steve Harvey is more than just a game show host. He is someone who stands up for what is right, even when it would be easier to look the other way. Steve decided to test his theory. During the third round, he watched Derek carefully, and that is when he saw it. A small earpiece, flesh-colored and nearly invisible, tucked into Derek's right ear. Someone was feeding him the answers. Derek Anderson appeared to be living the American dream. He was a successful insurance salesman with a beautiful family. His wife Christina had been his high school sweetheart. His 22-year-old daughter Emily was in her final year of college. His 19-year-old son Michael was a talented athlete on a football scholarship, and his younger sister Jennifer rounded out their family team. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect family competing on a game show for fun and maybe some prize money. But Derek Anderson was drowning in secrets and debt that nobody knew about. 3 years earlier, Derek had made a series of terrible financial decisions. He had invested their entire retirement savings in a real estate deal that his brother-in-law promised was a sure thing. The deal had collapsed, and they lost everything. Rather than tell his family the truth, Derek had taken out loans to maintain their lifestyle. He borrowed money from friends, maxed out credit cards, and even took a second mortgage on their house without telling Christina. The debt had snowballed to over $300,000. Derek was being threatened by loan sharks. The bank was preparing to foreclose on their house. His daughter's final semester tuition was due in 2 weeks, and he had no way to pay it. His son's scholarship covered tuition but not living expenses, and Michael was struggling financially. Derek felt like he was failing everyone who depended on him. When the Family Feud opportunity came up, Derek saw it as his last chance to fix everything. $20,000 would not solve all his problems, but it would buy him time. It would let him pay his daughter's tuition. It would keep the loan sharks away for a few more months. It would let him keep pretending that everything was fine. So Derek had done something he never thought he would do. He had recruited his nephew, a computer programmer, to help him cheat. His nephew had hacked into the Family Feud question database weeks before their taping date. They knew which episodes were scheduled to tape when, and they had a good idea of what questions would be asked. Derek's nephew would watch the taping from his computer and feed Derek the top survey answers through a tiny wireless earpiece. Derek had convinced himself that this was not really cheating. He was just leveling the playing field. He was doing what he had to do for his family. He was being a good provider, a good father, a good husband. He had to win. There was no other option. What Derek did not account for was Steve Harvey's years of experience reading people and situations. What he did not consider was that sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. And what he definitely did not expect was that Steve Harvey would confront him about it on live television in front of his entire family. The Anderson family dominated the first 3 rounds. Derek's answers were consistently the #1 responses. When Steve asked, "Name something you might find in a woman's purse," Derek immediately said wallet. Before Steve had even fully stepped back from the podium, Number 1 answer. When the question was, name a place where people whisper, Derek instantly responded, library, with complete confidence. Number 1 answer again. By the third round, the Anderson family had a commanding lead. Christina was thrilled. Emily and Michael were celebrating. Jennifer was dancing every time they scored points. They had no idea what their father was doing. They believed he was just having an amazing day, reading the questions perfectly and giving brilliant answers. But Steve was watching Derek's body language carefully. Every time Derek answered, his eyes would shift slightly to the right as if he was listening to something. His timing was too perfect. His confidence was too absolute. And most tellingly, Derek never laughed at Steve's jokes or engaged in the usual banter. He was too focused on the voice in his ear, too concerned with maintaining his deception. During a commercial break, Steve walked off stage and spoke quietly with the producers. He shared his suspicions. The producers were skeptical at first. This had never happened before, but they agreed to have security run a scan for wireless signals. Within minutes, they detected an unauthorized transmission. Someone was broadcasting to the stage area. The producers wanted to stop the taping immediately and confront Derek privately. But Steve had a different idea. He wanted to give Derek a chance to come clean. He wanted to do this in a way that would not just expose the cheating, but would address the deeper issue of why a man would risk his integrity and his family's reputation for $20,000. When they came back from commercial, Steve's entire demeanor had changed. The playful game show host was gone. In his place was someone serious, focused, and determined to get to the truth. Derek, Steve said, his voice calm but firm, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Derek's face went pale. He knew. Somehow Steve knew. How are you getting the answers before I ask the questions? The studio went silent. Christina looked confused. Emily and Michael exchanged worried glances. Jennifer's smile faded. The Roberts family stood frozen, not understanding what was happening. I don't know what you mean, Derek said, but his voice was shaking. Yes, you do, Steve said. You have been getting every answer right, and not just right, but the number 1 answer almost every time. You have been answering before I even finish asking the questions. And you have something in your ear that does not belong there. Derek instinctively reached up to touch his ear, confirming Steve's suspicion. The gesture was unconscious, automatic, and completely damning. Christina gasped. Derek, what is he talking about? Dad, Emily said, her voice breaking. What's going on? Derek looked at his family, saw the confusion and dawning horror on their faces, and something inside him collapsed. All the stress, all the lies, all the desperation came crashing down at once. I'm sorry, Derek whispered. I'm so sorry. Steve did not yell. He did not humiliate Derek. He did not make a spectacle of the situation. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone. He asked the other family and the audience to give them a moment, and he sat down across from Derek on the stage. Take that out of your ear, Steve said quietly. Derek removed the earpiece with trembling hands. Christina moved closer to her husband, torn between anger and concern. The children stood in shocked silence. Now, Steve said, I am going to ask you again, and this time, I want the truth. Why would you do this? Why would you risk everything to cheat on a game show? Derek sat there for a long moment, and then the whole story came pouring out. The failed investment, the hidden debt, the loans from loan sharks, the impending foreclosure, his daughter's tuition, his son's struggles, the crushing weight of trying to provide for his family while everything fell apart around him. I thought if I could just win, Derek said through tears, I could fix some of it. I could give Emily her tuition. I could buy myself some time with the loan sharks. I could keep my family from finding out what a failure I am. Christina was crying now. Derek, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell us? Because I'm supposed to be the one who takes care of you. Derek said, I'm supposed to be the provider, the protector. I'm supposed to have all the answers, and instead, I lost everything we had. I failed you. Steve let that sit for a moment, then he leaned forward. Derek, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear me. You didn't fail your family when you lost the money. You failed them when you lied about it. You failed them when you decided to cheat instead of being honest. You failed them when you chose to protect your pride instead of trusting them with the truth. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He put his head in his hands and sobbed. "Look at me," Steve said, not unkindly. "Look at me, Derek." Derek raised his head. "Your family doesn't need you to be perfect," Steve continued. "They don't need you to have all the answers. They don't need you to win game shows or make brilliant investments. They need you to be honest. They need you to be real. They need you to trust them enough to share your burdens instead of carrying them alone." Steve turned to address the cameras and the studio audience. "This man made a terrible mistake today. He tried to cheat on this show. That is unacceptable, and there will be consequences for that. But I want everyone watching to understand something. This is what happens when we let shame and fear drive our decisions. This is what happens when we believe the lie that our value as men, as fathers, as husbands, is measured only by our ability to provide financially." He turned back to Derek. "You say you're a failure. But let me tell you what I see. I see a man who loves his family so much that he was willing to risk his integrity for them. That love is real, even if the method was wrong. I see a man who has been carrying a crushing burden alone for 3 years because he didn't want to worry the people he loves. That dedication is real, even if the approach was misguided. And I see a man who, when confronted with his mistake, didn't make excuses. He told the truth. That courage is real." Steve paused, letting his words sink in. "The question now is, what are you going to do with this moment? Are you going to let this be the thing that destroys you and your family? Or are you going to let this be the moment when you finally get honest, finally ask for help, and finally start rebuilding the right way?" Derek looked at his wife, his children, his sister. They were all crying, but they were also still there. They had not walked away. They had not abandoned him. "I want to rebuild the right way," Derek said. "I don't know how, but I want to." "Then that is where we start," Steve said. "Right here, right now, with the truth out in the open and your family by your side." The producers disqualified the Anderson family from the competition. They forfeited any prize money they might have won. The episode would not air as a regular game show episode, but Steve insisted that what happened next be documented and shared. After the cameras stopped rolling for the game portion, Steve sat down with the entire Anderson family. He brought in a financial counselor from his foundation, a family therapist, and a debt management specialist. For the next 3 hours, they went through the Anderson family's entire financial situation. The news was worse than Christina had imagined. But it was also better, because for the first time in 3 years, the whole family knew the truth. They could stop pretending. They could start dealing with reality instead of hiding from it. The financial counselor helped them create a plan. They would need to sell the house and downsize significantly. Emily would need to take a semester off to work and save money, or transfer to a less expensive school for her final year. Michael would need to get a part-time job to supplement his scholarship. Christina would need to return to work full-time. Derek would need to be honest with his creditors about his situation and work out payment plans. It was going to be hard. It was going to require sacrifice from everyone. But it was honest, it was realistic, and it was something they could do together. Steve made a decision that surprised everyone. He told Derek that while the Anderson family could not keep any prize money, his foundation would pay Emily's final semester tuition directly to her university. Not as a reward for Derek's behavior, but as an investment in Emily's future. She had done nothing wrong, and she should not have to give up her education because of her father's mistakes. Additionally, Steve's foundation would provide the family with 6 months of debt counseling and financial planning services at no cost. They would help the Andersons navigate the foreclosure process, negotiate with creditors, and create a sustainable budget for their new reality. But Steve was clear about the conditions. Derek had to come clean to everyone he had lied to. He had to contact every person and institution he had borrowed money from and admit what he had done. He had to face the consequences of his actions with honesty and integrity. No more lies. No more hiding. No more shortcuts. Derek agreed to everything. Over the next several weeks, he made the hardest phone calls of his life. He told his friends the truth about the borrowed money. He met with the loan sharks and worked out payment arrangements. He contacted the bank about the foreclosure and explored their options. Every conversation was humbling and painful, but every conversation was also liberating. The weight of deception was lifting. 3 months after the Family Feud taping, Steve invited the Anderson family to appear on his talk show. The segment was titled, "When Desperation Leads to Deception: A Family's Journey Back to Truth." Derek sat on stage with his family and told the whole story. He did not make excuses. He did not minimize what he had done. He owned it completely. He talked about the shame that had driven him to lie in the first place, the pride that had kept him from asking for help, and the fear that had made him think cheating was his only option. Christina talked about the shock of discovering her husband's deception, the pain of realizing how much he had suffered alone, and the difficult process of rebuilding trust. She was honest about how hard it had been, how many arguments they had, how many tears were shed, but she was also honest about the fact that their marriage was stronger now than it had been in years because it was built on truth instead of pretense. Emily and Michael shared how the experience had changed their understanding of success and failure. Emily talked about taking a year off from college to work and how it had given her a new appreciation for education and financial responsibility. Michael discussed getting a job to help support himself and how it had made him more mature and focused. The talk show appearance resonated with millions of viewers. The segment went viral, not because of the scandal, but because of the authenticity. People saw themselves in Derek's struggle. They understood the pressure to provide, the shame of financial failure, the temptation to hide problems rather than face them. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out to share their own stories of financial deception and the toll it had taken on their families. Many admitted they were currently hiding debt, job loss, or financial struggles from their spouses. The Anderson family's story gave them the courage to come clean. Steve used the momentum to create a new initiative through his foundation called The Truth About Money. It provided resources for families struggling with financial stress, including free counseling, debt management education, and support groups for people dealing with shame around money issues. Derek became a volunteer speaker for the program. He traveled to churches, community centers, and financial literacy workshops sharing his story. He talked about how pride almost destroyed his family, how deception compounds problems, and how honesty, even painful honesty, is always better than comfortable lies. 1 year after the Family Feud incident, the Anderson family had sold their house and moved into a modest apartment. Derek had paid off the most dangerous debts and was on a structured repayment plan for the rest. Christina was working as a nurse again and rediscovering her professional identity. Emily had transferred to a state university and was thriving. Michael had learned financial discipline that many of his peers lacked. Jennifer had become an advocate for financial literacy among young people. They had less money than before, but they had something more valuable. They had trust. They had honesty. They had a foundation built on truth rather than deception. During a follow-up appearance on Steve's show, Derek reflected on the journey. "That moment when Steve Harvey confronted me on stage was the worst moment of my life," he said. "I wanted to disappear. I wanted to die. I thought my family would hate me forever. But it was also the best moment of my life, because it was the moment I stopped lying. It was the moment I stopped pretending. It was the moment I finally got real." Steve asked Derek what he would say to other people hiding financial problems from their families. Derek's answer was simple and powerful. "Tell the truth today. Right now. This minute. I promise you, the temporary pain of honesty is nothing compared to the long-term destruction of lies. Your family deserves your truth, and you deserve the freedom that comes from not carrying secrets." The impact of Derek's story extended far beyond individual families. Financial counselors began incorporating discussions about shame and deception into their standard counseling practices. Marriage therapists started asking specific questions about financial honesty. Churches and community organizations developed programs to address the intersection of financial stress, masculine identity, and family dynamics. 3 years after the original incident, Derek and Christina wrote a book titled The Lie That Almost Broke US One Family's Journey from Deception to Truth. The book became a bestseller in the personal finance and relationship categories. It provided a brutally honest account of how financial deception nearly destroyed their family and the difficult but rewarding process of rebuilding on a foundation of honesty. The book's proceeds were donated to Steve Harvey's Truth About Money initiative, helping fund free financial counseling for families in crisis. Derek and Christina used their platform to normalize conversations about financial struggle and remove the shame that so often keeps people from seeking help. 5 years after Steve Harvey confronted Derek Anderson on the Family Feud stage, the two men sat down together for a special interview. Steve asked Derek if he had any regrets about how things unfolded. "I regret cheating," Derek said immediately. "I regret lying to my family for 3 years. I regret letting pride and fear drive my decisions. But I don't regret getting caught. Getting caught saved my life. Getting caught saved my marriage. Getting caught gave my family the truth we desperately needed." Steve nodded. "When I saw that earpiece in your ear, I had a choice. I could have looked the other way. I could have dealt with it quietly backstage. I could have just disqualified you without explanation. But I felt like this was a teaching moment, not just for you, but for everyone watching. Because the truth is we all have our versions of that earpiece. We all have our secrets, our shortcuts, our deceptions we think are justified." The interview concluded with both men discussing the importance of accountability in a culture that often celebrates getting away with things. Steve talked about how social media glorifies the hustle without emphasizing integrity, how we celebrate people who fake it till they make it, without acknowledging the damage that deception causes. Derek shared that he still gets messages weekly from people thanking him for his honesty about his mistakes. Many tell him that his story gave them the courage to come clean about their own deceptions. Some share that they were contemplating similar desperate measures and his story stopped them. Others simply express gratitude that someone finally talked honestly about the shame and pressure that men feel around financial provision. The story of Steve Harvey confronting Derek Anderson became more than a viral moment. It became a cultural touchpoint for conversations about masculinity, financial stress, family dynamics, and the price of deception. The clip from that day is still used in financial literacy courses, marriage counseling sessions, and ethics classes as an example of how hidden shame can lead to destructive choices. Derek often reflects on the question that drives him now: what if I had been honest from the beginning? What if I had told Christina about the failed investment 3 years ago? What if I had asked for help instead of trying to fix everything alone? The answers are painful. His family would have had 3 more years of honest communication. They would have avoided the worst of the debt. They would have made different choices about spending and priorities. But Derek also knows that wondering, "what if?" is not productive. What matters is what they do now and going forward. Before we close this powerful story, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Derek Anderson's story is a reminder that integrity matters more than winning, that honesty is harder but better than deception, and that the people who love us would rather share our burdens than be protected by our lies. The Anderson family's journey from deception to truth continues. They still face financial challenges. They still make sacrifices. They still have difficult conversations about money and priorities. But they face everything together, honestly, without secrets. And that makes all the difference. Steve Harvey often says that the Derek Anderson episode taught him something important about his role as a game show host. It would have been easier to just take the earpiece, disqualify them quietly and move on, Steve reflects. But easy is not always right. Sometimes our job is to hold up a mirror and force people to see themselves clearly. Sometimes our job is to call out wrong behavior while still seeing the human being behind the behavior. And sometimes our job is to offer a path forward that leads to redemption instead of just condemnation. For Derek Anderson, Steve Harvey's confrontation was a gift wrapped in the most painful packaging imaginable. It exposed his deception in the most public way possible. It forced him to face consequences he had been running from for years. It humbled him completely and thoroughly. But it also freed him. It freed him from the burden of lies. It freed him from the isolation of carrying secrets alone. It freed him to become the man his family actually needed him to be. not the flawless provider he thought they expected. The final lesson from this remarkable story is perhaps the most important one. When Steve Harvey finally confronted the contestant who thought he could get away with cheating, he was not just catching a rule breaker, he was intervening in a family crisis that had been building for 3 years. He was creating a moment of truth that would either destroy the Andersons or save them, and by handling that moment with both firmness and compassion, both accountability and grace, Steve Harvey demonstrated what real leadership looks like when someone crosses a line. Derek Anderson tried to cheat on Family Feud because he was desperate, ashamed, and out of options. He thought he could get away with it because he had been getting away with lies for 3 years. But Steve Harvey saw through the deception, confronted it directly, and then did something extraordinary. He helped Derek turn his worst moment into his turning point, his greatest shame into his greatest lesson, and his most public failure into his most powerful testimony about the importance of truth. The earpiece that Derek thought would help him win the game ended up costing him everything he thought he was protecting. But in losing the game, Derek won something far more valuable. He won his integrity back. He won honest relationships with his family. He won the freedom that only comes from living in truth. And he learned that the people who love us do not need us to be perfect. They just need us to be real.